The wind begins as a rumor, a shiver across the surface of the Gulf. In Galveston, the barometer falls with a steady insistence that makes the skin crawl. Out, beyond the sand, waves unspool in long, glass-green cords. By dusk, the sky has the color of bruised peach. Men look toward the Gulf and the bay and realize water is rising from both directions. The thunder isn't thunder, it's something deeper, swallowing other sounds. St. Mary's Orphan Asylum sits closer to the sea than it should. Inside, the sisters tied the children to themselves with rope, a line of bodies like beads stitched into a prayer. Little hands reach for each other as the water reaches the second steps, then the porch. Midnight finds men on rooftops, looking over a city transformed into a black channel. Houses drift down the street. The island is a raft, losing its raftness. A wave the size of a street comes on all at once, and the asylum meets it. The entire building lifts, the floor tilts, and for an instant, everyone floats. The rope goes taut. In the next heartbeat, the world drops. The ceiling becomes the floor. Then the sea takes ownership, and the asylum is no longer a building but a raft. And then not even that, just fragments. Stair rails and hymnals and beds spinning in black water that hammers. A sister is dragged along the rope until her shoulder wrenches, and something tears. A boy's arms tighten around her waist, the only anchor they have. Their mouths fill with salt. In the rush, voices thin out and break. The darkness is not silent. It has the churn and thud of doors slamming underwater, the brittle crack of timber as it gives, the unpitched roar of everything moving at once. When the rope gives, it is like a last breath, stopped short. Some hands, still linked, surface among floating beams. Somewhere, far enough to be foreign, there's a lantern still burning, a ridiculous needle of human fire in a storm that has no patience for it. Bodies collide and separate. The night holds them all and will not keep them. Dawn makes no bargains. It lays light over what remains with surgical coolness. There is no street, only a tangle of beams and fences and boats where houses used to be. Men who endured the night become boys again when they see what the water has made and taken. People move with the slow, stunned motions of those whose muscles are no longer attached to commands. A father walks into what used to be his parlor and picks up a kitchen chair from the wet sand. The one repairable thing. The sea is back where it usually is, pretending at boundaries. On the beach, debris arranges itself into a landscape of They drag the dead onto looping piles and then onto carts. And when the carts are not enough, they burn them because there is no other way. Smoke in columns, the smell of wrongness that the body recognizes and wants to flee. The island is a ledger. In the margin someone writes a number and then crosses it out and writes a larger one and then finally stops writing numbers and begins to list names. In the waterlogged book of that day, a few pages survive. A few children, handful. The country hears late. The island rebuilds earlier than anyone thinks, scratching a higher line on the page and pouring a wall of concrete against future storms, learning too late and exactly when it can. A city remains, different by the weight of loss that cannot be measured in brick or granite. Water learns too. It remembers the seams in the land. The year changes. The state changes. The lake is inland this time, under a different sky, but the wind is the same kind of voice, low, insistent, tireless. September 1928, South Florida. Lightning moving sideways. Inside rain, so heavy it loses shape. A curtain suddenly drawn across the world. The lake, called Okeechobee Bigwater. Not wait for names either. A hurried earthen levee hugs its south shore, a mere suggestion of a wall. On the other side of the levee, towns lie flat as a hand. Belglade, Pahokee, South Bay. Some houses are on stilts, most are not. Workers come in from the muck fields with sugarcane cuts on their hands and shoulders and no illusions about where they will sleep that night. In wooden shacks thin as a story, radio sets in Palm Beach crackle with reports in educated voices that do not carry well across the fields. In the communities along the lake, women nail shutters. Men drag boats toward porches. The lake's surface is pushed by wind, then pushed again, stacking water at its southern rim like plates in a cupboard sliding forward before the fall. All evening the wind rises and bends the stalks until they flatten, and rain, heavy as fists, stamps the fields into black soup. Night rules in storms like this. You don't see the wall coming, only feel the ground change underfoot, the sudden absence where there should be something solid. In a shack near Torrey Island, a mother hushes a baby and listens to the levee as if it were a person. The babies always seem to know the truth first. They cry for it, the loudest. The levee is quiet because dirt is quiet when it's saturated and tired. Sometime after midnight, in the time when clocks become unrealistic ideas, the levee fails without theater. It slumps, eases, and then loses all qualities of a wall and becomes a suggestion of one. The lake spills, not a wave wall, a liquid geography migrating south, all at once, a room tilted and everything on the table let go. It rushes into the sugarcane rows, and along the unlit roads, and around the wooden houses, where people wake up already underwater. Cries splinter and rush with the current. The sound has the same low growl as the Gulf had in Galveston, a shared vocabulary of ruin, and it gains speed with the history of it. In a camp where shacks line up like teeth, a man in a white shirt holds a door closed against water like holding your palm up against a river. Ridiculous and human. Nails sigh. The lake arrives, wearing the night like armor, and the light inside that shack goes out, a candle snuffed too quickly to smoke. The first impact takes the house apart, like a hand through bread. Boards fracture into sharp, fast objects. The second impact turns people into particles in a brown, churning world, and the only horizon is the texture of water filled with everything it has taken blanks. Mattresses, fences, the white bones of rows of cane. Those who'd climb to rafters feel strength in their arms, and then feel it leave. The current sorts by weight, an accident. A girl surfaces gripping a plank and collides with something that turns out to be a chicken coop flipped into a boat. She crawls inside, not thinking, only sensing that here is less water than there. Somewhere, a man goes under and remembers in his last breath the sound his mom used to make when she sharpened a knife against stone. Fetching comparisons from memory is the mind's most human failing in disaster. Seeking metaphor in the exact moment when literalness would save you. The water goes and then keeps going, flowing out into open country, dividing itself into smaller violences. It bleeds into fields rimmed with barbed wire, tangles the wire with clothing and hair, makes gnarled markers of the fence posts. Dawn is thin when it finally arrives and finds a plain made of mud and ruin, bodies caught in the cactus and in the palmettos, children on door panels that were once the price of a day's wages. The survivors see how the flood chose. They count without wanting to know the sum. A line of wagons creaks along a road that is no longer a road. In town, a square is chosen. Newsmen in pressed trousers step off their trains and step into a different air sweet and iron, cloying. They cover handkerchiefs with perfume and press them to their faces. Men with shovels sink to the hilt before the shovel's logic returns. Each scoop of muck is a compromise. The graves fill up quickly. Then there are more graves, and another set. Bodies are segregated as if death has not made its point. A signboard leans from its nails at the edge of a large pit. It has dates on it, and nothing else. Years later, a concrete wall will go around the lake. Thicker, higher, built with machines and congressional regret, to prevent water from learning the same path twice. The sound that fills the air afterward, the whine of souls. The clinking of plates in church basements. The low pitch of rumor thins out and becomes a different pitch in a different state. The hum rushes into a whistle that becomes a shriek and then a scream. Rubber torn from rims. Wood vibrated to splinters. A freight train, people will say, because it is the closest sound they know. March 18th, 1925. In the middle of the country, the sky in southern Illinois looks like it has been cut open with a blunt knife. The underbelly bruised green. On the horizon, a black shape drops and expands, dragging a skirt of dirt and walls and roofs, widening as it goes until it is less a storm than a decision made by the air. To become weapon. DeSoto, Gorham, Murfreesboro, West Frankfort. Town names along a ruler straight scar. Men in coal mining towns climb out of shafts into daylight, just long enough to see daylight folding in on itself. The tornado's forward speed is monstrous, too fast and too sure. 60 miles an hour, tracking like a blade laid down across counties. It doesn't skip the way tornadoes are supposed to. It doesn't weaken. A teacher bolts the school door and turns the children toward the interior wall, and the wall is gone before the children get there. Brick becomes shrapnel. A boy who thinks he is safe under his desk finds the desk in the air with him, and they part company after they meet a tree. The hot stench of dust and ammonia-open privis flung into the mix makes breathing hurt. In Murfreesboro, block after block collapses into a puzzle of joists and stairs that lead nowhere. In the sudden silence after the long, continuous scream, people and sellers wait for something like an ending, holding onto the rafters with hands that have finished holding everything else. A woman calls for her daughter with the calm of someone setting a table. She calls and finally says her name too fast to hear its shape. The tri-state tornado goes on, as if drawing a line on a map with a finger until the finger grows tired or the ink runs out. By the time it lifts, it has unstitched more than 200 miles of land and people in a way no one is prepared to measure. Men look up at a sky that has returned to a blank expression, and they realize that the absence of terror has its own terror. Wind in one place, water in another. The country busies itself with building and burying, and the Keys, thin bones of land dropped into turquoise, are always last on the list until they are not. September 1935. A Labor Day most people only know as a day for grilling, but on Matacum Key, a federal camp with canvas tents houses World War I veterans sent to build a highway in return for wages and something like dignity. The barometer drops to a number no one has seen on a living instrument. The air gets dense and then thinner, and the water draws back from the flats and then rises in a way that feels personal, like a grudge. Somewhere north, a dispatcher finally gets a rescue train moving south along the overseas railroad, a thread of steel over water. The last miles are the longest miles. Rain erases the world from the engineer's windows. Wind claws. A bridge trembles and holds. The train is late, because everything is late against wind like this. On the platform at Isla Morada, men lean into nothing, watching when they can for the thin beam of the headlight that is supposed to be a promise. When the train finally noses toward the station, the ocean rises with a suddenness that looks like a trick. The Hurricane SAI is near, the pressure so low, it seems like you could step into a vacuum. The surge comes across the tracks as if lifted by an invisible spoon. The locomotive digs into the rails, metal arguing with water, and for an instant it seems like force will be enough. The wave keeps coming on. Cars tilt as couplings scream, and the headlight swings in a mad arc across palms, with their bark peeled off by sandblast. Veterans in their wet uniforms run toward the train that cannot save them, and a third wave, higher, leaned into by wind, aims for the strip of ballast the way certainty aims for anything. Fragile metal shudders. The engine's wheels spin empty. A palm trunk sweeps past at chest height. A spear. The wave rears and holds itself just long enough for everyone to see the shape of it before it breaks. The locomotive shoulders against the wall of water and loses. Not theatrically, but in a series of calculated failures, one axle lifting, another dragged sideways, weight redistributed until physics decides the argument is over. Cars topple like boxers in slow motion with sped-up sound. The smash of glass, the clack of metal, low, beastly groans as couplers part like tendons. A coach settles at an angle with four men inside bracing themselves against one another as the floor becomes a wall. A veteran in a shirt with a missing button wedges his shoulder in a window frame and yells for others to grab his belt. The surge lifts again and licks at his knees. Cold, then colder. Outside, palm trees bend like boughs until they break and the broken halves become missiles. Later, on the side of the road, the wreckage looks deliberate, as if arranged by a human hand for a photograph. But in the moment, it is chaos without author. When the eye passes, stars are visible through ragged layers of cloud, a momentary telescope to a different world. The stillness is false. On the other side of the eye, the wind returns with a new accent, from a fresh direction, taking what was spared the first time. Camp cots lift and somersault. Men clutch telephone poles that now stand in a salt river. After, the veterans' names are written in granite in a cemetery looking over the same water that undid them. Years tilt again. A different August. It is morning in a city that sits in a bowl, stitched by canals and history, with brass music in its bones. The Gulf is no longer just horizon, it's an entire weathered machine spread out to the south. First to swell, then a promise. The wind begins to speak in phrases that make sense only after the disaster. New Orleans wakes into air. Thick as soup as a storm swirls toward it, a vast pinwheel of white on satellite. Named and watched, the kind you can see coming for days. The difference between seeing and saving is a chasm you can drive a convoy through. Along the Mississippi coast, the surge stacks itself high and comes in fast water in places that think they understand water already passed. Casino barges, unmoored from their ridiculous docks, past live oaks whose leaves whistle once and then tear free. In Waveland, a house that survived 100 storms dissolves into studs and debris in under a minute, and the water keeps rising where there used to be streets. The line on the wall you drew to show your kid's height is briefly underwater. In Biloxi, shrimp boats pile on a highway overpass like toys. A woman climbs into her attic to escape and then realizes she has trapped herself. Somewhere, someone grabs a hatchet. In New Orleans, the storm proper does its work, tearing shingles, dropping trees, cutting power, but it is not wind that changes the city most. Hours later, on a brightening morning that could trick you into thinking it is over, the defenses built to keep water in its place falter. Flood walls along the 17th Street Canal and London Avenue Canal crack and slide, and then give entirely, water forcing its way under and around them, finding the soft soils below. At the Industrial Canal, a barge bobs loose and the lower 9th Ward is hit with water that roars through shotgun houses like an arresting officer through a door sudden. Violent, with indifference. Streets become canals without romance. A man who thought his single-story home was an argument against hubris sits on the roof with a neighbor waving a white towel at helicopters that buzz past as if the city were a coral reef and they were a curious bright fish. In a hospital whose generators live in the basement, a decision whose logic used to be obvious air grows hot and stale. Nurses write the time with a Sharpie on patients' chests because they have to keep track of something. The elevators have become shafts for bad air. In a nursing home, water slaps against hallway walls. Residents sit silent in their wheelchairs, faces lifted to catch any stray breath of air from a box fan attached to a failing power strip. In the Superdome, tens of thousands gather into a biome of need human heat, fear, aloofness, kindness, all stirred by rumor. The stadium is the biggest, brightest bowl of all. Systems meant to be redundant reveal their single point of failure. People. In the days that follow, rescuers in flat-bottom boats move along street grids made unreadable by currents. They call out addresses as if summoning people at a roll call. Dogs bark from rooftops. Old men wave. Some houses hold the dead they did not drown in the moment, but in the hours afterward. After batteries failed and insulin ran out and the phone stayed dark and the heat pressed down. The unfolding of catastrophe is long and slow as well as sudden and sharp. Years later, in a different sea and a different story in the same language, the sky goes black over an island that is the beating heart of a poetry plantons, sizzling in oiland. The sound of rain changes to a sheer sheet of noise you cannot think inside. September 2017. A storm with a woman's name that becomes a number and then an argument. It comes at night like many do, but the island counts its heartbeats in daylight too, as towers sway under its core and everything electric begins to flicker like a tired eye. The grid is not a grid so much as a tangle of old decisions, badly maintained. When the wind begins to howl like it has a purpose, the power steps out and does not return for minutes that lengthen into hours, that become weeks for some, months for others. In mountain towns, roads slide off into ravines, whole switchbacks gone with the heavy, sodden earth. Rivers that usually gossip in beds of polished rock snarl and shoulder their banks aside. In a hospital in San Juan, a nurse answers the alarm of a ventilator with a manual bag plastic globe of air, squeezed in the rhythm she knows from training. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. The generator coughs, hesitates, coughs. The battery cracks out a high keening sound that is supposed to remind a human to take the place of a machine. The nurse and another woman may be a relative, maybe a stranger trade-off. The room is lit by flashlights, angled with tape. The drip chamber of anaphor trembles. On the 15th floor of a concrete tower, an old man stares at the stairs and then at the dark elevator. He has diapers to change, food to heat, a wife whose breath moves shallow under the edge of sleep. The water he has is in a plastic barrel. He lifts a bucket and begins to count steps. 10, 20, 40. Somewhere between floors, he forgets the number and knows that counting is a human trick fools people with optimism. He keeps going because that remains. Outside, the wind whips palm fronds against the building like switches. Rain finds its way into places even dry places have. Hairline cracks that become lines of ink drawn down walls, into outlets, into panels. The map of the island goes dark, pixel by pixel on screens in Washington and New York that glow with the power denied elsewhere. A battery somewhere gives its last tone. The manual bag in the nurse's hands becomes the only thing that matters. She inhales for the patient with her hands. She exhales for them with her hands. There is no other clock in the room. The nurse's forearms burn, muscles firing like flares, and then going quiet, and then sparking again. The generator outside coughs once more, and then the darkness presses forward. Greedy, persuasive. What has kept people alive in storms is not always concrete or code. It is sometimes a hand repeating emotion, a rhythm borrowed from a heart. In that San Juan room, another pair of hands come in, and then another. Somebody says, "We've got you," as if that phrase can be made literal. The generator catches at last, not because it is merciful, but because fuel found its way to it and a line was cleared and a switch coaxed by exhausted fingers settled into the position marked on. The ventilator's screen blooms pale green and blue again. The bellows behind the patient's chest, taking the burden. The room exhales as if it were a single set of lungs. Outside, the island counts itself in neighbors, knocking on doors with Tupperware fried dough, in machetes clearing landslides, one swing at a time, in lines for gas that become endorsements of patience, in satellite phone calls that ferry messages to sentences at a time. We are alive. We need insulin. We are still alive. Official tallies will arrive slow and contentious. The dead will be debated, but the loss will exist in the silence around kitchen tables where voices used to be, in the classrooms with one fewer child raising a hand. Thousands of miles away in time and feet, Galveston rebuilt, fortified. Its seawall, a gray line of defiance, faces out to a gulf that keeps its own counsel. After 1900, the island raised itself up, literally, through the moral slow labor of jacking blocks of city and filling the void underneath, a human tide against a future tide. There is a marker where the asylum once stood, names recited like beads again, a chain that holds because memory is a kind of rope, and we need it to be. On the lake south of Palm Beach, a dike taller and thicker than a boast wraps its circumference. The Herbert Hoover dike, poured and compacted across decades, penned by the understanding that water takes everything literally, but even concrete must be watched, tested, mended. In Illinois, along the scar the tri-state tornado burned into 3 states. Warning signs were reimagined. Over years, clouds caught on radar, telephones ringing in kitchens, sirens wailing through summer air. A modern web of forecasters and algorithms and radios began to stand in for the man on the porch staring at the sky. In the Keys, the snapped and salt-scorched length of railroad was not laid back down. Instead, a road grew in its place, and a memorial stands in a clearing under palms, names carved deep into stone where wind can't erase them. As for the train, a story is told with a piece of bent rail in a small museum near where the surge came over like an unarguable fact. New Orleans has new levee stoller. Broader, armored, built with dirt hauled from somewhere else, and promises hauled from podiums. Gates, the size of buildings, swing on hinges, the size of ambition. Pumps, coughed water out, with cubic yard appetite. Communities that were once left out of maps insist on being drawn correctly, loudly. That city still sings, and in its music are notes that bend like willow, acknowledging the bruise under the skin even as the brass shines. Along the Mississippi coast, houses on tall pilings have stairs like ladders and ground floors that are not meant for living. The air sometimes smells like sun-warmed pine and salt at the same time, and people weigh decisions in dollars and in memories. Puerto Rico strings, new lines across mountains, black cables slicing the sky. Microgrids and solar panels appear like silver scales on roofs. The work is halting and tangled, slowed by the same seams in the system that storms find with such ease. A number 2975 sets into print, not as a final word, but as a stone in a river against which the water breaks and goes around. The true measure, like always, is in the absences birthdays less crowded, dance floors with a hand missing from a favorite wheel of friends, a porch seat no longer claimed at dusk. As a nation, we write these lessons down and then try to remember them. Build high, build back, build smart. Do not store generators in basements. Do not load veterans into tents on low ground in late summer. Listen to the barometer, the radio, the quiet voice that says leave. Imagine evacuation not as an idea, but as a practice. Count every life not only at impact, but in the long tail of aftermath when power and medicine and cold air are as critical as sandbags. We learn that storms amplify what is already fragile. Not only houses, but health. Not only levees, but trust. And storms are changing. Water is warmer. The air is wetter. The sea rides higher against our shores, reaching farther inland with a casual, terrifying ease. Rain falls harder in places where rain is already a fact of life. Surge arrives in neighborhoods that used to be theoretical, de language, of 100-year and 500-year floods, stumbles over reality. It has always been true that the poorest parts of town are on the lowest ground. The new truth is that the line between high and low is moving. What endures in these stories is not just destruction. It is the stubborn glow of human presence inside wind and rain. An insistence on tying ourselves to one another, sometimes literally so that the rope holds. When the building goes, it is the neighbor banging on your door at dawn because he knows you don't have a car. It is the nurse's forearms burning. It is the custodian who knows where the breaker is. It is the Coast Guard pilot who sees a hand waving from a roof and lowers the basket again. It is a girl in a flipped chicken coop who lives to tell it. It is a mass grave with an honest sign and flowers placed anyway. It is the way the ocean returns to calm, and the way we don't forget that the calm does not mean innocence. The deadliest storms America has known thread the map, like a stitched wound. Galveston's 1900 dead remembered in numbers too large and too imprecise to fit comfortably in any mouth. The Okeechobee Flood's thousands, many buried without names. The tri-state tornadoes, 695 across towns, that still mark the day in stone and story. The 1935 Seas Hurricane, taking men who survived one war and were sent unprotected into another. Katrina's 1,800 plus, counted in arcs of spray paint on doors, in obituaries written in present tense. Maria's thousands, most claimed by the months-long echo of the storm rather than the hours of it. Add to them the Sea Islands hurricane of 1893, whose surge smothered the low marshlands of South Carolina and Georgia, taking more than 1,000 souls in a night heavy with heat and mosquitoes. Each storm different, each storm the same. We live here anyway, by oceans and lakes, and on the long flat plains that invent their own winds. We build higher, thicker, with better maps of where the water went last time and where it might go next time. We draw arrows on plans pointing to places where generators ought to be. We teach children to leave when told, and we remind them that sometimes no one will tell them and they must trust sky and smell and the edge in their mother's voice. We make memorials. We light candles. We write names. When nature strikes back, it is not revenge, but a reminder that force and scale are not virtues reserved to us. We answered with architecture and policy and, at our best, with the simple geometry of reaching across the narrow gap between two hands. It is not enough, and it is what we have. Somewhere right now a wind begins as a rumor. Somewhere else a door shuts against rain, and somebody, on some future night, will tie a rope and make a vow and hold until they cannot hold any longer and be held by someone else who takes the line. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that changed the world.